Someone is standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, feeling their heart race over a simple sentence. That's not what happened. A few minutes ago, they were certain what was said last night, certain what was promised last week, certain that joke at dinner crossed a line. But now, as the other person talks, that certainty starts leaking out of their body. The room feels tilted, like the floor moved a few degrees under their feet. You always take things the wrong way. You're remembering it wrong. You're so dramatic, seriously. The tone isn't screaming, it's tired, a little superior, like you're a child making a fuss. Your face gets hot, your throat tightens, your brain starts to scramble, trying to replay the memory while they're still talking. You were sure. Now you're not. You start a sentence, but you said, and they cut in. I never said that. Why do you always twist my words? By the end of the conversation, you're not angry anymore. You're small. You hear yourself saying, okay, maybe I misunderstood. Sorry. Later, alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, an old, familiar thought runs in circles. Why do I always end up feeling crazy after we talk? If you recognize that feeling in your body, this is for you. Because what's happening there isn't just miscommunication. It's not just normal conflict. It's a pattern that slowly, quietly teaches you to distrust your own mind. That pattern has a name, gaslighting, and understanding it is one of the first ways to step out of it. Think about how this shows up over time. In a relationship, it rarely starts with something huge. It starts small. You say, hey, it hurt when you made that joke about me in front of your friends. They shrug. You're too sensitive. Everyone laughed. It wasn't that serious. The next time, you hesitate a little more before saying anything. Eventually, you stop bringing things up at all, because somehow you always leave the conversation feeling like you are the problem. You remember one Saturday you waited home all afternoon because they said, I'll be back by 3. They walked in at 6. When you said, you told me 3, they laughed, no, I said later in the afternoon. You just heard what you wanted. You replay the exact moment in your mind. Their voice, the clock, your plan. Their certainty makes your memory crumble. In your family, it may sound like, we never did that, when you describe being left alone too much, or being mocked, or being scared. You say, I felt really lonely as a child. And a parent snaps back, that's ridiculous, we gave you everything. Your body remembers nights crying alone in your room. The family story says those nights never existed. To stay loyal, you start editing your own history inside your head. At work, it can be more subtle. Your manager gives you a task and a deadline. You meet it. Later, they say, I told you it needed to be done earlier, and imply you dropped the ball. When you try to check, I thought the deadline was Friday. They respond in a tone that makes you feel stupid. No, I clearly said Wednesday. You start copying every instruction into documents. You feel jumpy when they say, we already talked about this, even if you're sure you didn't. Inside, after enough of this, your internal dialogue changes. You start each complaint with, maybe it's just me, but even when it's obviously not just you. You find yourself apologizing in the middle of sentences just for bringing something up. You think, I must be too sensitive so often that it becomes part of how you define yourself. This pattern almost never begins with the first partner, boss, or friend who gaslights you. It usually begins much earlier, in quieter ways. Picture a little girl who says, that scared me, after someone yells or slams a door. An adult responds, stop being dramatic, it was nothing. Her heart is still pounding. Her body is still in alarm. She learns very quickly, my body says danger, but the people in charge say nothing happened. To stay connected to them, she has to disconnect from herself. Picture a boy who says, that hurt, after a parent makes a cutting joke about him in front of others. They smile and say, you're too sensitive, learn to take a joke. If he keeps being upset, they roll their eyes, here we go again. He learns that pointing out harm brings more shame, not
repair. Better to learn to laugh along. Better to doubt the hurt than risk being mocked for feeling it. Some families live on double reality. At home, there is tension, stonewalling, maybe even violence. In public, the family looks perfect. Compliments pour in. Your parents are so amazing. If the child tries to say, it's not like that at home, they feel a wall go up. A parent might say, don't make us look bad, or why are you always so negative? The message becomes, what you see and feel is not allowed to exist outside. Eventually, the child turns that rule inward and stops letting it exist inside too. By the time these kids become adults, the ground under their sense of reality is already cracked. They're used to thinking, maybe I'm remembering wrong. They're used to softening every hurt with, it probably wasn't that bad. They're used to pushing down anger with, I'm overreacting. That's what makes gaslighting in adult relationships so effective. It lands on soil that has already been softened. Gaslighting can look like clear denial, I never said that, when they did. Minimizing, you're making a big deal out of nothing. Changing the subject, you raise an issue with them and suddenly the conversation is about your tone, your mental health, your past. Using your vulnerability, you told them you have anxiety and now every disagreement becomes, this is just your anxiety again. Let's put this into real everyday scenes. You tell your partner, when you text your ex at night, it makes me uncomfortable. Their answer, it's just friendly, you're insecure, none of my ex's partners had a problem with it. A normal boundary gets turned into a character flaw. You tell a parent, when you comment on my body, it hurts me. They answer, I'm just worried about your health, don't be so sensitive. Your simple truth becomes your problem. You tell a friend, I felt left out when you all made plans without me. They respond, you always think everything is about you. We just forgot, why are you creating drama? Instead of addressing your feeling, they attack your motives. After a while, your own mind does their work for them. You start
deleting sentences before you send them because it sounds crazy. You rehearse conversations so many times that you feel exhausted before they even happen. You catch yourself thinking, if I have a problem with this and they don't, the problem must be me. Gaslighting's goal, conscious or unconscious, is to keep the other person comfortable and in control by making you question yourself. Here's the hard truth. You will never argue your way into being believed by someone who is invested in rewriting reality. They don't need more proof. They need you to doubt your own inner world, so theirs is never challenged. So the real work isn't, how do I finally convince them I'm right? The real work is, how do I stop abandoning myself every time someone doesn't like my truth? That starts with small, practical shifts. First, separate what you feel from what you conclude. Gaslighting works best when feelings and stories get tangled. I feel hurt, so that means you're a monster, is easy to attack. So is, I feel hurt, so that means I'm broken. Try something simpler. I feel hurt. Full stop. You don't have to know in that exact moment whether you're right to feel that way. Your nervous system responded. That is information. You might say, even just to yourself, I feel hurt when you joke about me. That sentence is about you, not them. No one can honestly argue that you don't feel hurt. They can argue whether they meant to hurt you. They can argue about whether it should hurt, but your feeling itself is real. Second, externalize confusing conversations. After an interaction that leaves you spinning, get it out of your head and onto something else. A notes app, a journal, a voice memo. Keep it simple. What I remember they said, what I said, how I felt before, during, after. For example, they said they'd be home at 7. They came at 11. When I said I was worried, they said I'm controlling and crazy. Before, worried. During, confused and small. After, ashamed and shaky. Reading that back later, when you're calmer, often feels different than replaying their voice in your head. You might think, if I heard this from a friend, would I call them crazy, or would I
say, yeah, that would bother me too. Third, learn to end circular conversations. Gaslighting often pulls you into loops you can't escape. You start on one topic, they shift it. You chase, they move it again. Hours later, you don't even remember why you started. There is quiet power in saying, we're going in circles. I'm not willing to keep having this conversation like this. And then actually stopping. That might mean saying, I'm going to bed now, or we can talk about this another time. And disengaging, not sitting there while they keep going, hoping it will make sense eventually. At first, your whole body may scream, stay and fix it. That scream comes from your history. It comes from times when walking away really wasn't safe. Now, you get to test if that's still true. Fourth, set boundaries about what you will not accept, even if they don't agree. One of the most gaslighting phrases is, you're overreacting. A boundary can sound like, you're allowed to think that. I'm allowed to feel what I feel. I won't keep talking if you keep dismissing my feelings. You're not asking for permission. You're stating a condition for your participation. They may roll their eyes, call you dramatic, or try to argue. You don't need to win that argument. You just need to follow your own boundary. If they keep doing it, you step away. It's like saying, you're free to choose how you behave. I'm free to choose what I stay for. Fifth, intentionally spend time with people and spaces that reflect you back accurately. If your whole world is built around someone who constantly questions you, they become your mirror. You need other mirrors. Notice who in your life responds differently when you share your experience. Maybe it's a friend who says, "That sounds really hard. I can see why you're upset," instead of, "Are you sure?" Maybe it's a therapist. Maybe it's an online support space where people have lived similar things. When you tell them, "This happened and I'm wondering if I'm overreacting," and they say, "Honestly, that would hurt me too," something inside you relaxes. That doesn't mean you make them the new authority and never question yourself. It means you let
their reality sit next to yours instead of only hearing the gaslighter's voice. Sixth, practice small acts of self-trust regularly. Gaslighting told you, your judgment is broken. You can't trust your thoughts or feelings. To heal, you need new experiences of, "I trusted myself and it turned out okay." These don't need to be huge. They can be choosing to rest when your body says, "I'm done," even if someone calls you lazy. Listening to the tight feeling in your gut and saying no to a plan, then noticing later you're glad you did. Ending a text argument instead of staying up past midnight trying to get the last word. Each time you choose your internal signal over someone else's shaming voice, you're rewiring something old. Seventh, look at your own gaslighting tendencies, gently. Many people who've been gaslit also end up doing small versions of it to others, not from malice, but from habit. Maybe a friend says, "That hurt me," and your first reflex is, "It wasn't that bad, you're overreacting." That's gaslighting, even if you don't mean it harshly. It's your learned discomfort with feelings showing up as invalidation. Instead, you can practice pausing and saying, "I didn't mean to hurt you, but I hear that it did. Tell me more." You don't have to accept every accusation. You don't have to agree with every interpretation, but you can stop telling other people what their inner world should be like. That's part of breaking the cycle, both ways. As you keep doing this work, the story begins to change. You still have doubts. You still have moments where you think, maybe it's me. Gaslighting leaves long shadows. That doesn't mean you're stuck there forever. You begin to recognize the difference between someone genuinely trying to understand and someone trying to win. The first might say, "I don't remember it that way, but I want to understand how it felt for you." The second says, "You're wrong, end of story." You learn to lean toward the first and step back from the second. Your body becomes less of an enemy. The quick heartbeat, the sweating palms, the twisting in your stomach, you stop reading them as proof that you're ridiculous. You start reading them as, "Something about this isn't okay for me." That doesn't mean you shout or attack. It means you listen. Some relationships may change or end. People who rely on you doubting yourself will not enjoy the new you who says, "I don't agree," and doesn't collapse. They might accuse you of changing or being brainwashed or playing the victim. That will hurt. You might question yourself all over again. But look at what's really changing. Not your basic kindness, not your capacity to love, not your intelligence. What's changing is your willingness to accept a version of reality that erases you. Slowly, quietly, this work helps you move from, "Am I crazy?" to, "This doesn't feel right to me," and that matters. Think back to that kitchen scene one more time. You say, "That really hurt," and they say, "You're overreacting." In the old pattern, that sentence from them would slam the door on your reality. You'd retreat, apologize, rewrite the story so they looked right and you looked wrong. In a new pattern, you might still feel that first sting of doubt, but then you might think, "My feeling is allowed to exist whether or not they understand it." You might decide, "I'm not going to keep arguing tonight. I know what I experienced." You might message a trusted friend, or write it down, or simply sit with yourself and say, "I believe me." That's how gaslighting loses power. Not because the gaslighter admits they were wrong, but because you stop handing them the keys to your inner world. If you saw yourself in these examples, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've been living in environments where your reality wasn't respected, sometimes for years. The fact that you're even questioning it now is a sign of strength, not weakness. You're allowed to step slowly back toward your own mind, your own body, your own memory. You're allowed to say, "This happened. It mattered."
and I don't need someone else's permission to know that.